Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talking to Kids About Consent. My name is Angel, use they, them pronouns, and I'll be your guide throughout this workshop today. Before we get going, I just wanted to acknowledge the great privilege I have to be presenting this to you from Treaty 6 territory as a person with very unmelanated skin. I've had to do a lot of work to really connect to what colonization is, and I really encourage you to do the same. It's been a very uplifting experience, and I look forward to continuing my decolonizing journey. I'm presenting today on behalf of ASPEC, which is Advocating for Sex Positive Education and Consent Culture. We're a nonprofit that's located in Edmonton, Alberta, and serves all of Canada. We provide shame-free, comprehensive sex ed, healthy relationships, strategies, and skill building, along with a wealth of other things that fall under that whole sex positive, shame-free umbrella. Our main mandates are to ensure that everything we're doing is coming from a an intersectional awareness where we do understand that there are several factors that society will sort us by, and it will change how we interact with the content and really how we interact with the world. And that's all about respecting diversity, working really hard to be inclusive. And in order to do that, you also have to be accepting of things that are very different from what your own norm is. We do our best to create a welcoming space with very clear, safer space and anti-oppressive policies. Okay, let's get going. So things to remember when we're talking about consent, it's not really about sex. Yes, we're aware that what we are doing is building that foundation for when our kids are older and are starting to have more intimate relationships, more grown-up relationships, that they do understand respect and bodily autonomy as it applies to sex and intimate relationships. But consent is more about unlearning all those things that we've been taught that pave the way for disrespecting both our own bodily autonomy and other people's. And so it's long work, right? So, but just when you're getting agitated about the idea that you might be talking to your kids about sex, this doesn't actually, it's not actually about sex per se, it's that it applies also to sex. So consent, it's a lot more than just sex. It's everything from those casual touches, whether a child's okay with high-fiving. Some don't want to at all, and that's okay. To whether or not they have the right to say yes or no to different types of contact throughout their lives, and whether or not that's respected. So consent is all about learning about bodily autonomy, and not just body autonomy, but also our right to be a person who is being treated in a way that is dignified for ourselves. So that can include verbal things, emotional content, that kind of thing. And we already teach consent, right? We tell our kids not to take things that don't belong to them, unless, of course, a person said they could, not to put their hands on other people, unless they agreed to that, right? Like high-fiving or giving hugs, and not to tell other people secrets unless they need help or they want you to give away those secrets. So we're already teaching consent to kids, and we just want to take it a step further and provide them that background they need to understand the nuances of what being a respectful human being is all about. So a lot of what we learn about children when it comes to as children, when it comes to consent and bodies can be really confusing thanks to social norms. A lot of these norms have taught us some very complex things about our bodies, like we have the right to tell strangers no, but not the right to tell close family no. That we're told that nobody should see anything that's underneath our clothing, but then we go to doctor's appointments or we go to the beach and wear a swimsuit, and these things can be very confusing. Even like tickling a child, and then when they say no, not stopping, and not respecting them when they're like, do it again, sort of thing, is confusing the whole idea around bodies and consent. And so, some examples, right, is we tell them don't touch people without unless they say it's okay. Like you can't just walk around touching people. But then grandma comes over or auntie or whatever, and when it's time to leave, we're like, okay, give everybody a kiss goodbye. Even if they don't want to, they're often encouraged or emotionally punished if they don't comply. Someone might have hurt feelings, they might be treated as if they've done something wrong if they're not giving out those hugs and kisses at the end of the day. Same with bedtime hugs and kisses. Even parents, right? Doing the whole, okay, give me a kiss goodnight. Oh, do you want a kiss goodnight? And giving them that space to say no. So that can be one of the lessons that's very confusing. So, with this, what we learn through that is that our body belongs to people that love you. People who love you are allowed to touch you, kiss you, hug you, even if you don't want them to. And that can really set the stage for later on in life, having really unhealthy boundaries in intimate relationships. It can. We also learn that it hurts someone's feelings, and therefore we need to consider that and not say no. So if someone feels hurt when I don't want to hug or kiss them, I should just do it so they don't feel hurt. And this is a lesson that is often very gendered as well, with folks who are assigned female at birth, often being told things like, just dance with him, just, don't turn him down unless you have to, like those kinds of things. Really be careful of hurting people's feelings as we go through life, which also sets the stage for a really unhealthy power balance in intimate relationships. The other lesson that we often learn as children is that strangers are dangerous. Don't trust strangers. And yet, the truth is, less than 7% of child sexual assaults are committed by strangers. 59% are by people that work with a child, like sitters, coaches, that kind of thing. And the remainder are family members. You can go take a look at rain.org or any other um, scientifically researched database to take a look. The numbers don't vary by more than a few percentage. And this is a really important thing for you to recognize, is that when we teach our child that they have the right to say no to us and we respect that, they become more confident in setting those boundaries, which is really important because we know they need those boundaries for people who are in their intimate circle. So their parents, their caregivers, their nurses, their coaches, that kind of thing. The kind of typical boundary lesson that we get as children is that we are at the core, right? So we're allowed to do whatever we want with our body because it's our body. And people who are in intimate relationship with us, like our spouse, are the closest, and they're allowed more touch, more access to our personal space. And then family should be, in that circle that we make, whereas friends should be within arm's length and acquaintances should be outside of arm's length, and strangers, of course, further away than that. And this again really confirms that messaging that people that care about us have more rights to our body, rather than talking about how it is a more risk aware choice to allow people that we trust um, to have access to us. And more about that later. The other lesson is we are taught to respect boundaries. Things like don't eavesdrop, don't tell people secrets, don't hit, don't go in mom's purse, don't take money out of dad's wallet, don't read someone's diary or their journal, don't go in the bathroom if someone else is in there, if someone's changing, give them space or turn your back, like those kinds of things. But the truth is, in our lives as parents, we disrespect our child's boundaries. We read and share their personal writing. We post their photos online. We tell about their personal experiences to other people. We tickle them after they said no. We don't knock and wait for permission to enter rooms and stuff like that. And I hope that some of these you're going, well, I certainly from respecting these boundaries. But these weren't things that I learned organically in my own family home. They're things I had to learn about, and so they're on here. So when we tell one thing to a child, but then we do another, that creates a real conundrum for the youth as they're growing up. And it also reaffirms that whole idea that um, we don't really have that right to personal privacy from people that love us. Because if they love us, it's okay for them to go through our personal things or share our personal stories with their family members or friends. And in a era with a lot of social media, like this is something to really pay attention to, because I've heard from teenagers how embarrassed they are that their parents were posting stuff online about them and whatnot. And I know I have a blog about my child, and every time I post it, even when he was really little, we read the blog post together and we talked about it and who would be reading it and what it meant. And he got to decide whether or not that was okay. And when he got to an age where he was like, I don't want you to share this anymore, I didn't. I mean, you can check out the blog post, but like, yeah, you can see where it stops because he was like, no, I don't want you to share that, and so I didn't because those are his stories. I was only the witness to those stories. And for reference, my youngest child's on the spectrum, and we were together working on a blog to educate people that it's not the end of the world. Um, and he does his own work now. So the lessons that are learned from all of this is that power equals no consent needed. So when adults disregard the privacy or the autonomy of children or other adults around them, that message is that that power they have negates the need for respect and consent, and that love equals no consent needed. And that is a lesson that is really confirmed in society with a lot of this ideas that we owe our partner some sort of intimacy. And we want to be shifting that narrative to our body's ours. We get to decide what we do with it, period, bar none, instead of looking at it as something you're entitled or something that you give or get, and instead changing the message to be more that intimate connection is something you do together when all people are interested in doing it. So when we use that love and that concern as a reason to disregard privacy, to disregard autonomy, that message that love and caring really are valid when it comes to ignoring privacy and bodily autonomy is really hammered down. We also learn that intentions are more important than impact. So you say you shared an embarrassing story about your child to someone else, even when they're hurt by it, because you thought it was funny, for example. The message is that regardless of how someone feels, it's okay to share if your intentions were to not hurt them, which is really problematic when it comes to healthy boundaries in our relationships as adults. And then we also teach them that those lines are blurry. So my body is private, but not private from people who don't want it to be private. The bathroom is private, but not from people who feel entitled to be in the bathroom with me. And all those rules that we're setting to create body safety and awareness of healthy relationship boundaries become really blurry. And they shouldn't be, and they don't need to be. And so we can tighten up those messages just by considering those lessons. Another lesson that we learn is to ask first. Even if your friend likes hugs today, they might not want a hug later, so ask first. But is that what they see at home? So you might kiss and hug your partner or other people that you care about without asking. Casual and not so casual touches, butt slaps, even that aren't agreed to, like those kinds of things. And that means that behavior that we're modeling isn't going to match what we're verbally saying. I don't know how familiar you are with like the Bobo doll experiment, but like it's been demonstrated with very strong scientific evidence that children are more likely to engage in behaviors that they see, not the behaviors they're told to engage in. And so the lessons that they learn with those kinds of things are that in some relationships, um, the being in that relationship means that you're agreeing to a certain amount of intimate touch. And again, I want you to think about your own adult relationships and how much healthier they would have been, how much safer you might have felt if that wasn't the case, or how much more trust there would have been between you and your partner if touch and relationships always required some sort of consent and nothing was ever just assumed. Um, they also learn that stop means to do it again. So if there ever is a touch and a parent says stop and the other one laughs and does it anyways, or if you're tickling your child when they say stop, those kinds of things, that's the lesson. Stop means do it again, right? Um, and then some types of touch or some types of people become like, what does this mean? Don't touch people, but yet touch is happening. So I can't touch the cashier, but I can smack someone in my family's butt. I can't kiss my teacher, but if someone comes home from work, I can kiss them. Don't hug mom when she's busy, but make people hug you when they're leaving, right? Like, so these contexts start to become part of the social nuances that your child will be picking up when it comes to bodily autonomy. And so we just need to think about what that means as they get older and have their own relationships. And how can we at home model better communication around consent and touch and all of that good stuff? Because we can do better. And I can tell you that kids pick this stuff up really quickly. We can model and teach to offer alternative greetings instead of hugs and kisses. So being like, "Hey, it's so good to see you. Did you want a hug? You want to like give me an air high five? Like, you want to shake hands? Like, what feels right for you?" And we can model and teach setting and respecting boundaries with our own loved ones. Then we can do it over the top if we need to, like if we're noticing our kids getting handsy with siblings or friends and that kind of thing, and that we have that kind of really touchy feely relationship ourselves, we can model this in the family home by, when we come home for work and our partner goes to kiss us, saying, "No, thank you, not right now," and having them respect that. And making sure that those roles go back and forth so that we're showing that when you set a boundary, people can respect that. And it's not about having hurt feelings, but just about respecting where that person is in that time and place. We can also model in the family home that we are going to respect our children when they say no to touch or want privacy, even, and I would argue, especially when it's inconvenient. I go out of my way to not put my hands on my grandchildren unless they're okay with it, and that was problematic sometimes. Like we have one that's a runner, likes to run away, and doesn't like to hold hands. And so I said, "What can we do then to make sure that you're staying safe? Because I need you to not run away. So if you don't want to hold hands, what would you like to do? Do you want to hold on to the shopping bag with me? Do you want to help push the cart? Do you want to hang on to, like, can I hold your jacket instead? Like, what would you like me to do?" And she was pretty happy to like set those boundaries and to pick something. And if she decided to have a temper tantrum, I would keep her safe, but as best as I can without putting my hands on her. And sometimes that just meant sitting with her and letting her be okay with throwing a tantrum. Um, it's hard. It's really hard. I'm not going to lie and say that it's not easier just to lay down the law. But I know that when they're adults, that means they've had at least one person modeling to them that they always have bodily autonomy. And that's already starting to show in their friend circles, and they're all in under grade 6. Now, as our kids get older, when they hit teens and tweens, it gets a lot more complicated, but the same principles are going to apply. So don't panic as your kids start turning into teenagers. Um, it becomes a lot more important for them to fit in with their peers, and they're going to spend a lot more time with folk that are the same age as them, age-ish. And they're also going to start developing their own individuality. And for some, that might mean going through periods or forever deciding to dress completely different than the way you want them to changing the way that they're expressing their gender. And also wanting to have relationships that you don't approve of, things like that. And there's a lot of things that are driving this conversation at this time. Hormones, of course, make a difference. They're starting to develop adult feelings, and that includes physical feelings and emotional feelings. So some things that we might see is that we have less control over what kind of content our kids have access to as they become teens and tweens, because they are relying more on their peers. And we also will see that they're starting to express their identity in new ways, whether that's gender based, or, you might be a family of really athletic people and they decide they're going to do something else, or they might really strongly attach to another aspect of their personality that they've already started developing. That's all totally healthy and normal. Also, healthy and normal is that sexual curiosity and the conflicting emotions that start to occur for teens and tweens. And for more information about how puberty impacts the way teens and tweens interact, check out our Sex Ed for Parents class. You'll love it. It's a lot of fun. But there's some actual science behind why we feel that way as we're going through adolescence. They have a lot more emotions during puberty. And the addition of attraction and crushes and sexual thoughts and interests can be really important in defining experiences for our youth. Um, and body image plays into that as well. And so just keeping these things in mind as we're going through that, these are all really normal shifts, and we should encourage it as well as set healthy boundaries. So, some things to be really careful of throughout youth, and especially monitoring as they hit teens and tweens, is body shaming. We want to be very careful. We're not giving the idea to our youngster or our teens or young adults that their body is not enough, or that our body is not enough. So, not fat shaming people, not normalizing one style of body while, abnormalizing other sizes, and show that you can have self care at all sizes. So it's about making sure that we do get a proper nutrition, not that we never have junk food. And it's about making sure that we do what we can to keep our body healthy, which includes moving it once in a while. Not telling them that they can't play computer games because we don't want them to be fat, or that they can't be a couch potato, for example. And challenge your own use of body shaming. This is especially important in families where you really struggle with your own self-esteem around body image. And so as a fat femme myself, I know I had to do a lot of work to help my youth be okay with their bodies as they ebbed and flowed and changed. And I have three very differently shaped children. I have one who is just tall and very thin. That's just their natural state. That's their how it is. I have one who's just average. So he's got some muscles, got a bit of a belly, but like he's just shaped average. He's got a dad bod, right? And then my middle child is very voluptuous, has a lot of padding, but very curvy, and they've gone through all these different flux of body shape and body size, and so have I. Thyroid issues run in our family tree, so like this is a thing, but we don't have to be down on ourselves because of how our body is shaped. The way our body is shaped is impacted by so many factors: genetics, health issues, metabolism, things that we don't have a lot of control over. And it's okay if your body is on the bigger size or smaller size. It's okay if you're short or tall. It's okay if you have gangly arms but great big hands. Like these things are okay. It's okay for your body to look the way it looks. Are you keeping it clean? Are you doing what you can to be healthy? And not counting calories and that kind of thing. There's a whole bunch of body image work out there by way better speakers than I. Check out Allison Tunis out of Edmonton. Amazing work she's done in body positivity. And then also, we want to educate ourselves on gender roles, make sure that we understand it, particularly as it applies to dating, consent, sex, and relationships. We want to model healthy boundaries, not gender based expectations. So, we don't want to be teaching our boys that it's okay to put your hands on your friends and be rougher, but then telling our girls not to, etc. All of that. So we want to make sure that we are modeling and talking about consent and dating and relationships in a way that respects that everybody, regardless of their gender, has those same rights, that they have those same responsibilities for respecting other people's rights, regardless of what gender or sex they are. And then see if you can, at this point, when your kid starts changing, this is a great time to start having those shame free conversations, and be like, hey, I noticed that your body's starting to mature. Do you have any questions about that? I know I was really anxious when my body started changing because nobody had given me any information. Instead of going, wow, you really stink, right? And like just sneaking deodorant into the bathroom, take them shopping. Like your body's changing. I bet you're also going to start experiencing things like body odor and whatnot. I think it's time you had not kid shampoo and body stuff, but let's go get you your own, like pick out a scent, pick out something that smells right to you and go from there. And same with relationships when they start dating, being like, oh, that's amazing. So you're developing feelings for somebody. What are you doing about that? Are you guys still friends? Like, I remember my first crush. Like, this is a problem I ran into. Um, Even I still remember the first time I met your mom or your dad, right? And how that felt. So I'm excited for you that you're entering into this stage of your journey. Do you have any questions? Like, talk about it when it comes up on TV or when you overhear something on their TikTok or whatever social media that they're listening to. And not in a judgy way, but in a more of a curious and supportive way. So, not, oh, I can't believe they said that on that TikTok. I'd be like, oh, what did you think when you heard that? You know? And like, did I misunderstand that? Because I'm confused about what that person just said. And oh well, for me that sounded really non-consensual. Like, did I miss something, or is it just like, you know, I know I'm not trendy. I'm 50, so I probably am out of the loop for new things. But I think it's still trendy to respect human beings, right? And being able to go like, yeah, I love this show. I just wish that this scene they'd done better at navigating whatever it is that has to do with consent. Like there's lots of opportunities as we're going through our day-to-day stuff with our teens and tweens to just bring stuff up in a I statement way, not a you statement way. It's like, oh, I really wish that I have a guilty pleasure, by the way, of Law and Order, and I just really wish that they did better at not shaming victims of sexual assault. And so when I'm watching it and I have someone else around, I'll verbalize that, like, oh, I just love this show. I just wish that they would not use outdated myths around gender and sex when they're dealing with victims of assault. And then, it opens up a conversation. Ask what they're learning in school or if they have enough resources. Let them know that if ever they come across a book or something that they're interested in, you'll add it to your shopping list. No questions asked, right? Like, have those conversations. Make sure that we're opening the door for those conversations, and you do that by not judging, by being curious, and by backing off when they don't want to talk about something, but giving them other opportunities. Like if ever, there's a book or a class you want to go to, like just let me know. I'm happy to make that happen. And you can tell me, I don't want to talk about it, but I need this, right? And that's okay. And this ties into having talks, not the talk. We should not be waiting until our child is dating and then sitting down and giving them the serious talk. This birds and bees stuff is not right. Because what it does is teaches that this is so shameful that we have to wait until usually it's too late to even give basic information. Conversations about consent need to be ongoing. When you're watching a show and something happens that's not in line with consent, talk about it. When you make a mistake and don't respect a boundary, own it. When someone is pushy and you don't set a boundary, discuss it. model consent, talk about it. And it's the same with sex, really. If we're going to talk about consent in the context of sex, we need to be able to have ongoing discussions about sex, gender, sexuality, and admit it when you don't know something. Research it together. Teach that our bodies are ours, that sex is natural, that consensual experiences are natural, and that we can have those when we choose to. Talk about it. It's just a conversation. And you will find that if you can approach these conversations that way, you're actually going to have a better relationship with your kids in the first place. Okay, so when it does come to sex, consent actually has some rules. And I really like the Fries model because it's easy to remember, right? Everybody loves fries and I love consent. So, like, what could go better together? So consent has to be freely given. That means that in order for it to be freely given, I also have to feel free to say no. So if we're not giving space for someone to say no, if we're doing something to create pressure where they feel they have to say yes, that is not freely given. It also needs to be reversible or revocable if you prefer, meaning at any time we can withdraw consent. Think about it as if we're talking about borrowing a car, right? If you want to borrow my car and you threaten to beat up my child if I don't give it to you, I'm probably going to give you the car. That's not actually consent, right? And if I went to court and was like, yeah, like they threatened me or my children bodily harms, of course I gave them the keys. The court is not going to go, oh, Angel, you consented. We can't charge this person with grand theft, you know? And it has to be revocable. So if you want to borrow my car and you're out doing stuff and I need my car and I call you and I say, I need to return my car, and you go, nah, I'm going to keep it, right? That's not lawful. And neither is it lawful when it comes to sex. It also needs to be informed, as in we have to know what we're agreeing to. So if you have to borrow my car, but you don't tell me you're taking it out of country, or that you don't have a driver's license, or that you're inebriated, that's not consent. If I didn't know those were the parameters, then I couldn't consent to it. And it's the same with sex. We need to know what we're agreeing to. So if somebody is like, hey, do you want to make out? And we're thinking kissing and they're thinking all the way to sexual penetration, that's not consent, right? It wasn't informed consent. It also needs to be enthusiastic. So a reluctant yes is not a yes. If you're like, can I borrow your car? And I go, oh, sure, what the heck? Go ahead, take my car. Not like I need it today. That's obvious sarcasm. I said the word yes, but that's not a yes. And it's the same with sex. So a guess or whatever isn't consent. It needs to be appropriately enthusiastic. Also needs to be specific, meaning that if you borrow my car, doesn't mean you can just show up whenever you want and take my car in the future, right? If I lend you my car so that you can go pick the kids up from school, that is specifically what I consented to. You picking up the kids and then returning my car. Not you picking up the kids for the next 6 weeks, not you picked up the kids and then decided you were going to go out for 7 hours. That's not appropriate. And the same with sex. So if somebody is consenting to sex, that doesn't mean they're consenting to pictures of sex. If somebody is consenting to making out, that doesn't mean they're consenting to any other aspects, right? So it needs to be very specific. So again, freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, specific spells fries. There's some really good videos on this. Feel free to go check them out. If you watch the T one together with your kids or ask them if they know of any good consent videos, that might be a really good way to find out where they're at. They've probably seen the T video. All right, and only a yes is a yes. And not just a yes, but a yes is a yes, right? So topics that we want to tackle when we're talking to teens and adolescents are all these strange concepts we have in society from being in a sex negative society that doesn't believe in bodily autonomy, is things around playing hard to get, what the difference between persevering and stalking, the difference between flirting and harassment, What's the difference between a compliment and harassment? Power imbalances. We want to talk about how you can't actually consent if somebody has authority over you, because the power makes that very complicated. We want to talk about myths around rape. Like, for example, in society, we just believe that women, of course, they consented, and we also believe that they lie about being sexually assaulted. And you might not think you believe that, but the next time somebody tells you that they've been sexually assaulted, I want you to think about all those little thoughts that go through your head, because that is the material that has been fed to us through pop culture, through conversations we've overheard adults having, etc. So victim blaming ideas, gender roles and sexual consent, intoxication and sex, dealing with a no or a lack of a yes. Like, we need to talk about that. What does that look like? How can we do that gracefully and not internalize it as rejection? How to say no, which is a huge thing for a lot of our youth. Don't know how to say no and what to do if someone doesn't respect their boundaries. All of these things are topics that we should be tackling throughout our consent conversations, and keeping in mind that consent is informed and freely given. It's also coherent and ongoing. If it's not ongoing, it's been revoked, right? It should be sober and enthusiastic and clear. It's also essential, and it's comfortable. Consent is comfortable. Discomfort is a big red flag that consent has been revoked. It's active, so we're not passive when we're consenting. It's also changeable. It's based on equal power, and it breaks away from these gender roles. Any partner might want to take it slow. Any partner might be really excited to move forward. And it's not one partner's job to initiate the action all the time, and it's not one partner's job to give consent and the others to get consent. And so making sure that we also flip that conversation around and talk about how flirting isn't consent. Being silent or dressing a certain way or just not saying no, these things aren't consent. Neither is being in a relationship. Accepting a ride or agreeing to a drink is not consent to sex. If you have to convince somebody to have sex with you, that's not consent. That's actually coercion. And this is a real problem. If you've had sex with someone before, that's still not consent. Saying yes or saying nothing when you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, that's not consent. Saying yes or giving into something because you feel pressured or too afraid to say no, not consent. It's not a free pass. When you say yes to one act, it's not the consent to other acts. Every act requires its own consent. And when we break down the conversation in that way, we can deal with things in a more comprehensive manner and really build a foundation for understanding what bodily autonomy is. Teaching teens about consent means recognizing that they have the right to say yes. And this is really hard for parents. The age of consent in Canada is 16, meaning a 16-year-old can consent to sex with anybody at any age, providing they're not more than 2 years younger than them. Pretty sure it's 4 years. 4 years younger than them. No, I'm pretty sure it's 2 years younger than them. I'm going to have to Google that now. And I know that there's what we call the horny teenage clause. If you go and look at the criminal code around consent to sex, it does state that children who are 12 can consent to sex with somebody who's within 2 years of them, and at 14 within 4 years of them. And this is because we know these types of relationships happen. And so keeping that in mind, hormones do create sexual interest. And if we're going to talk about consent, we have to be able to express to our child that they do have the right to say yes when they feel ready, when they want to. That's not our choice to make for them. And that we hope that they're going to do it from a place of risk awareness and really wanting to, not just lackadaisically, because it is important. It's your body. It is the only thing that you are going to enter into the world and exit the world owning is this. right? So knowing that that is yours and you get to decide what to do with it is really important. But that includes talking about the right to say yes. And so we need to unpack some of our angst around the idea that our teenagers might be exploring sexual things. Because if we're worried about controlling it, then we're not supporting doing it in a healthy way. It's not our job to control it. It's our job to give them all the tools that they need to make healthy choices and to reduce risks when they do make those choices. Gonna exit the full screen here. Stop sharing. So one of the other things that I just wanted to add to this is this can be a really scary conversation to have with your child if you're not used to talking about sex and consent in this way. Um, what I'd like you to remember is that it doesn't have to be. It can be a very organic conversation. You do not need to be afraid about talking about these things. They already know the basics of sex. 6-year-olds know that sex exists. And when we have these conversations without feeling bad and ashamed, when we can just be like, look, your body's changing, your interests are changing, and it's totally natural to want to be physically closer. It's totally natural to want to experience sexual pleasure. When we can have those conversations, our children are actually more likely to delay the onset of sexual activity, and they're more likely to engage in really strong, healthy practices around sexual activity, such as making sure they have birth control, that they're using barriers, that they're with somebody that respects them and respects their boundaries. And that means maybe even having conversations around pleasure and that kind of thing. So if you have any questions about that, again, check out the Sex Ed for Parents. You'll get a lot more information there. But consent just comes down to teaching our kids to respect bodily autonomy. That is just really the brass tacks of it. It's like, this is your body. That is someone else's body. Nobody gets to interfere with your body unless you decide that that's okay. And you don't get to mess around with anybody else's body unless they decide that's okay. Tattoo artists can't just go around in crowds and start tattooing people. They'd be charged with assault, right? Somebody who's a boxer can't just go to Walmart and start punching people out and going, but I'm a boxer. And it's the same with sex. Everybody involved has to want to be there and explicitly agreed to being there and doing those things in order for that to proceed. And we just start with smaller things like don't hit, don't touch people without asking, don't take their things, respect their privacy. And that's how we build a very comprehensive model around consent. If you have questions in the future, feel free, just reach out. My name's Angel. It's Angel at aspec, aspecc.ca, as seen below here. And I'd be happy to hook you up with appropriate resources. I really hope you enjoyed this class and wishing you all the best.